Good morning. We're here to discuss Silicon Valley real estate market week number 35. I'm Richard Calhoun, Creekside Realty. Happy to work with buyers and sellers here in the Silicon Valley. The slides flashing on the screen in front of you are the slides that we'll be going over in the next roughly 40 minutes. We start off talking about the micro markets within Silicon Valley, which is Santa Clara County, Alameda County, and San Mateo County. Then we talk about Silicon Valley as a whole. Then we expand out to the northern Greater Bay Area, which includes 13 counties, adding in San Francisco, Marin, the North Bay, Central Valley, and Central Coast. Here's the first data slide. This is a summary of the heat maps that we're going to be going over next. We'll come back to this after we do the heat maps. So here's the first heat map. What this is doing is showing the lack of inventory in the different micro market areas. We're looking at the 10-year median, and you can see in Santa Clara County, you're basically somewhere around 60% of the 10-year median, with the major exception being the Milpitas, North Valley, Berryessa, and Santa Teresa area, which is only at 35% of the inventory you'd expect. So that only has 1/3 the number of available listings. Campbell's at 60%. If you go up into San Mateo County, you can see it's about 2/3, maybe 3/4 of the inventory you'd expect. Low inventory favors the seller. There's less choice for the buyers. That provides more competition. But now let's flip over and look at the number of offers. This is what the buyers are doing. And again, you can see in Santa Clara County, you're about 50% of the level of offers you'd expect. The huge exception in this case is Cupertino Sunnyvale, coming in about 106%. You go up into San Mateo County, and it's about 2/3 to 3/4 of the inventory you'd expect, with the huge exception there being the San Mateo County coast at only 40% of the buyers that you'd expect. So these are offers accepted in the past 5 weeks, which really lead to closed transactions down the road. A lack of buyers or lack of offers from buyers favors the buyers, and that's why it's blue in color. But now we start looking at the ratio between the number of buyers and the number of sellers, and that we do that with days of unsold inventory. And now what we're doing is we're comparing the days of unsold inventory now to the 10-year median. And you can see some areas are pink, and some areas are pale blue, and some areas are bright blue. What that's telling you is when it's pink, it's favoring the seller. That means the DUI is lower, because DUI is the speed of the market. The faster the speed of the marketplace, the lower the DUI number is. And the faster the number is, the more aggressive the market tends to be. So that favors the seller. The higher the DUI tends to be, days of unsold inventory, the more it favors the buyer. The blue again is favoring the buyers. And you can see there's quite a bit of variation in the different micro market areas, which is why it's important to look at micro market areas instead of counties as a whole. Now we're moving on to days of unsold inventory. Now we're just looking at raw counts. What's the numbers now? And this is basically going back to my benchmark of 40 to 80 days of unsold inventory as a balanced marketplace. Anything less than 40 is a seller's marketplace. Anything greater than 80 is a buyer's marketplace. And you can see, I use different numbers depending on what I'm doing. But this is the calculation from anything under 6 weeks is going to favor the seller. That's 42 days. Anything over 11 weeks, 78 days, is favoring the buyer. You can see the only area that really favors the buyer significantly is the expensive areas in San Mateo County. And I'll talk about sort of a contradiction because, it's very slow, but yet they've had the most appreciation. And that's just probably a market mix of what's selling. The next slowest area is the San Mateo County coast. The bulk of the Silicon Valley is pink, which means it's favoring the sellers, which is why the market activity is pretty quick right now. For those that don't like statisticians to play around with the numbers to try to make sense out of them, this is a pretty straightforward metric. This is just looking at how long does it take the long typical seller to sell their property. I'm defining the long typical seller to be the 75th percentile seller. And you can see in Santa Clara County, that's basically shy of 2 weeks. Some of the expensive areas is 3 weeks. You go into San Mateo County and the numbers are basically the same order, but a little bit higher. It's more like 4 weeks, especially when you look at things like the coast at 57 days or the expensive areas at 83 days. The fastest area is Redwood City at 14 days. And if you go over to Alameda County, it's very similar to Santa Clara County in being just shy of 2 weeks. And again, you can look at the map and sort of just get a feel for the different areas. Now we're looking at what the sellers are doing to their ask price prior to the offer coming in, or they have what magnitude of price adjustments on average are sellers making to entice the buyer to make an offer on their particular property. And you can see these numbers don't vary very much, and that's because sellers tend to do a fair amount of homework before they put their house on the marketplace. Therefore, they're coming on at the right price. Also, with the 75% of the sellers selling in their home in less than 2 weeks, they don't really even have time to adjust their price. Between 99.25% and 99.75%, so only a 0.5% range, is a balanced marketplace. From 99.75% to above 100% is favoring the seller. The only area that's way above is Union City, and we talked about this, I think it was just last week, where the sellers are actually raising their price 1.5% on average, and the vast majority of the sellers are not raising their asking price. So this means a small percentage of the sellers are raising their price fairly significantly. You can see Foster City's down 0.2%. A lot of these are right in that 0.75% discount to 0.25% to 0.75% discount. Some of the areas are going above 0.75%. The biggest one is the San Mateo County coast at 3.5%. The expensive areas at 2.5%. Saratoga Las Gatos at 1.3%. South County at 1%. So they may not sound like big numbers, but when we look at the details, what you'll find is that means some sellers are taking fairly significant price reductions to attract the offers. And that's because the frequency of the sellers doing price reductions are pretty small. You can see in Santa Clara County, you're right around only 7% of the sellers are doing price reductions. But you jump down to South County where the, was blue because 1% even. So 1% reduction, but that means 1 in 5 sellers are taking a price reduction. And if you go up to the San Mateo County coast, where I think it was 3.6%, 40%, nearly half, 2 out of 5 sellers are taking a price reduction, and that's why the number becomes 3.6%. Redwood City only 9%, so you can pick your favorite micro market area and see. In general, the percentage of sellers reducing their price is fairly small. Now we're flipping over and looking at what happens when the buyers come in. And this is the magnitude of overbidding. And you can see in the expensive areas in San Mateo County, buyers are actually going in 3.33% below the seller's asking price on average. Along the San Mateo County coast, 1.75% below the asking price. Everybody else is above the asking price, which is, pretty common when you have a fairly aggressive marketplace. So we have an aggressive marketplace with not a lot of volume to it. The thing that's been interesting, and it's been this way all year, Oakland and Berkeley, Alameda, the city of Alameda, have the greatest overbidding at over 10%. Buyers are going at more than 10% over the seller's asking price. And remember, that includes the buyers that are going below. Typical or the median overbid would be higher than the average overbid. This is the frequency of overbid, how common is overbidding. And you can see in Oakland, Alameda, the city, and Berkeley, you're almost at 70 and 80% of the buyers are offering more than the asking price. But in general, you can see in Santa Clara County and in Alameda County, about 3/4 of the buyers offer more than the seller's asking price. 3 out of 4 offers that are accepted come in above the asking price. In San Mateo County, that number is a little more varied and probably somewhere around 50%, and it varies greatly depending on the area. Only 20% in Menlo Park, even though it's a slow area, 1 in 5 sellers are still getting more than their asking price. The highest I'm picking up again is Redwood City, which was the fastest pace, and that's at 60%. 3 out of 5 sellers are getting more than their asking price. This is the appreciation measured from the last 9 months of 2015. It might sound like a weird benchmark, but what I was looking for was a year period of time when the market was fairly stable to get rid of the fluctuation you have when you have an imperfect marketplace. but I could only find a 9-month period. So I'm using the last 9 months of 2015 as my zero, as my base year or base 9 months, and then looking at the appreciation. So the higher the appreciation, the redder the color. The bluer the color, the less the appreciation. And the big standout, which I sort of referenced earlier, is the expensive areas in San Mateo County. Even though it's doing slowly right now, it's had the best appreciation. And I suspect this is a fairly small micro market area as far as the number of transactions involved. And you're having a shift in the what's sold recently. So the homes that are sold right now are most likely more expensive than they typically are. And that can happen when you have a small sample size. And that's a good example of why I don't do this data down on the zip code level, is because your sample sizes would all be too small then, and you basically start getting garbage. You get too much statistical fluctuation based on what's happening. That's why I have micro market areas grouping multiple zip codes together of similar properties, so you get a sense of what's going on in the area. And you can see even in Santa Clara County, it varies quite a bit from the inexpensive areas, the affordable areas having 90% appreciation, and the areas that I'm seeing that have the least expensive, or the most expensive areas in Los Altos and Palo Alto, have the least appreciation at 55%. But the concept is the same. Also, when you look at this, the bluer areas tend to be near the job centers, and the red areas tend to be on the outlying areas, the more affordable areas. And I believe this is all related to the pandemic and the fact that some people believe they're not going to have to go into work as often, or they have more flexible hours so they can get away from the peak rush hour timeframes. Now, instead of just following the median price, which is what I assign the color to, which is the middle number, I sandwich it. I put up the cheapest 10 percentile in the area, as well as the most expensive 90 percentile in the home area. So you know that 80% of the homes are between these two numbers, 900,000 and 1.9 million in the case of South County, and you know the middle of it is 1.2 million. 40% of the homes are selling in a $300,000 range between 900,000 and 1.2. Another 40% of the homes are selling between 1.2 and 1.9. It gives you a lot more information. It gives you the outlying areas. It allows a consumer to figure out what price they want to do and figure out what price range, what geographical areas they might want to consider. For someone that only has $1 million, they might be able to find something in South County and the affordable areas of San Jose. But when you start saying you go into Milpitas and North Valley and Blossom Valley, if the cheapest 10 percentile home is 1.2, the chances of finding a home at 1 million are greatly reduced. They're going to be way under 1 in 10. And that's going to be most likely a smaller home, a home that has a negative, like a busy street, maybe a home that needs cosmetic repairs. So just because you're at $1 million budget doesn't mean you can't find a home in Milpitas, but you're not going to be able to be picky, and there's not going to be very many of them. So it gives you an idea of what areas might be affordable. Union City, Newark down here might be an area at 1.1 where you could potentially see a couple more homes just because you're closer in the price range. Here's the summary of what we talked about. You can start on the right-hand side with either your payment or the price range, and then move to the left and see what micro market areas you are able to afford or willing to afford. Or you can start on the left-hand side in the areas you want and see what the different micro market conditions are going to be. And you just look across. You can see that for the most part, the expensive areas in San Mateo County are a buyer's marketplace, as noted by all the blue. The only thing that's red is the price range, the appreciation, and the monthly payments. And we talked about, this appreciation being the highest is probably a fluke caused by market mix. Then if you want a hot marketplace favoring the sellers, you go to Cupertino Sunnyvale, and the majority of the areas are redder in color. The exceptions are the appreciation, because the appreciation in that area has been lower, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. When you have a hot marketplace, you'd expect higher appreciation, but we're looking over like an 8-year period of time. Now we're taking all those micro market areas, putting it into a blender and looking at what Silicon Valley is doing. And you have the purple line down here. So we only have 65% of the inventory that we normally do, but we only have 70% of the number of offers that we have. But the number of offers is higher than the percentage of active listings, which gives you a hotter marketplace than you want. So your DUI, the speed of the marketplace, is 15% faster than it typically is, or 85, only 85% of the value that it normally is. Well, a DUI of 100 is going to take 100 days to sell all the properties at the existing rate of sales with no new listings coming on the marketplace. And right now, what we would be seeing is an 85 day, which is quicker. You're 15 days quicker. That's the concept. Now we're raising one of the big issues, which is just the lack of volume. And this has been pretty consistent. We've basically been having the lowest year out of the last 25 years as far as volume of transactions. The exceptions was a period of time right around April and May, and that's because in 2020, with the shelter-in-place orders and the inability to show properties, the volume in 2020, as you can see by the dark blue, the record low, was lower than it was in 2023. 2023 was the second worst year instead of the worst year. And again, that's happening now the last 2 weeks. And the year that's beating us out now is 2007. Back in 2007, you only sold 1,587 properties, and now we sold 1,892. So we're selling 20% more than our worst year out of the last 25 years, but we're only selling 71% of the median over the past 10 years. We're selling 30% fewer homes than you would expect, and we're only 87% of the low over the last 10 years. We're still not doing very well into the end of the third quarter, beginning of fourth quarter of 2007 was a pretty slow market time. Now we're just looking at the payments, and it is interesting in the period of time that we had the rapid rising of price over several years from 2018 all the way through 2020, and maybe even a little bit into 2021, we had relatively fixed payments. Payments weren't going up despite house prices going up. Then because we had stable interest rates and rising prices, payments went up, and then we got into a period of time where we had rising interest rates. But what I find interesting is in 2022, when the market was collapsing, payments were actually decreasing because prices were dropping faster than interest rates were going up. The decline that we experienced was not, in my opinion, and I think it's based up by the data here, was not a payment driven. If it was payment driven, the payments would have been flat or increasing slowly. The fact that payments went down meant it was getting cheaper and cheaper to buy housing on a monthly basis, which is how people essentially buy the house, and the prices were going down, yet the market was collapsing. Now we're looking at something that's unique to me as far as I know. It's looking at the ask price reduction distribution of the seller. So we're starting off a year ago with the dotted line here. Dotted lines are the oldest, then we go to dashed lines, and then we go to solid lines. And what you're doing as you go down into the right, the sellers are taking bigger and bigger price reductions. And how you read it is basically right here, 5% of the sellers are taking a 15% price reduction. And you come over here and 17% of the sellers would be taking somewhere around a 92% an 8% price reduction. So you just get a feel. Let's just step through so you can see the market going down. There's the worst. Now we improved in spring. That's the peak. Now we've cooled off a little bit, but not very far. And now we're going to be bouncing around. There's an improvement, and now we're right in that area. The market basically jumped up at the spring like it always does, hit a peak right before Memorial Day, and then has cooled off slightly during the summer months. Now we're flipping over and sort of doing the same thing on the buyer's side, and we're looking at the distribution of the buyers overbidding. There's your dotted lines. You can see they're pretty stable going down for the end of the year. Now we're increasing, so we're into 2023. Very stable here for a long period of time. There's sort of the peak, maybe right there. And now you've come down ever so slightly, a very tight marketplace, but you can see, and the peak here is going to be later than the peak in the previous slide. And the huge advantage of the seller price reductions is you don't have to wait for escrows. To find the amount of overbidding, you have to wait 5-6 weeks for those escrows to close. And then it's telling you what the market had been doing versus what the market's doing right now. And that's why I introduced the seller price reductions up at the time that they accept their offer. Now we're looking at the components for all of Silicon Valley. And what we're doing is we're plotting, and the next series of slides are the same. The thin blue line is the coolest level that you'd expect for that particular marketplace. So high inventory is a cool marketplace. So the most inventory, and that's defined as the 10 percentile. The gray line is the median. That's where you'd expect the market to be. And the red line is the 90 percentile, or in the case of inventory, the 10 percentile, because it's the lowest number. But when you're close to the red line, you're in a hot marketplace. When you're close to the blue line, you're in a buyer's marketplace. When you're on the gray line, you're in a balanced marketplace. Right now, you can see that today's number is 1864, and the lowest we'd expect is 1904. We have 40 less listings than you would expect. The least that you would expect, where you'd actually expect to be, is around 2850. We have a shortage of about 900 listings out of a typical number of about 2,800, which is about the 1/3 of the missing inventory. Now we're looking at the number of offers. The red's on the top because a lot of offers is a hot marketplace. And you can see we're significantly below the least number of offers you'd expect, which is 2258. We're at 1867. So you're, 400 listings less, and that's 20% less inventory than you expect, as offers than you'd expect. And the real number you'd expect is here is at 2680. You're basically 800 listings on a base of 2,600, which is almost a third off on your number of offers accepted. And we're nowhere near the 3,000, the most number of offers you'd expect. Now flipping over to days of unsold inventory, we're between the typical 41 days and a hot marketplace of 26. We improved fairly significantly. Last week for some reason was sort of an anomaly where it bounced up and bounced back down, but we're at 35 days. You're sort of in between. You're 6 days faster than typical, 9 days slower than the fastest market place you'd expect. That's why you're coming in at 85% of the typical DUI. If you were having a typical year, you'd be right on the black line. And you can see for the 5-year period of time I'm showing, we haven't had a typical year based on the 10-year, and you can really see the spike of the pandemic shelter-in-place announcement. And then you can see how rapidly the market improved, and the market got down here into superheated territory. And then you can see how rapidly the market cooled off. You can see the bounce in about the August timeframe of 2022. And then you can see the improvement coming into 2023. Here's days on marketplace. So just how long is the seller taking? The fastest you'd expect to sell is in 19 days. Now we're selling in 20. So that tells you the market's fast. You'd expect to sell 24 days. So you're 20% less time than you typically would expect to sell for this time of the year. And there it is, 85% of what you'd expect. Now you're looking at the seller's ask price reduction. So the seller's ask price reduction is right where you'd expect it to be. But this is a pretty tight number. You can see that we're at 99.2. The least reductions you'd expect is 0.5% at 99.5. The most reductions you'd expect is 1.8% at 98.2. This is now starting to look at the sellers that took the biggest price reduction. I'm looking at the 90 percentile or the 10 percentile of the sellers that took the biggest price reductions. And what was that price reduction? Right now it's at 88.9. So there are 10% of the sellers that are out there that took an 11.1% price reduction from when they listed their property to when they got the offer accepted. The least you'd expect is 9.6%. The most you'd expect is 13.8%. These price reductions are a tight number, but they're great because they give you a leading indicator. You can see in 2022 how it shot up dramatically, sellers taking less and less price reductions. And then you can see it sort of hit a plateau at 100% because it's hard to go above 100%. But this is going to be April 1st. So way before April 1st, this was plummeting down. It gives you that early warning sign that, hey, something has changed. And just look how dramatic that change was. You went from 100% down to 84%, and you did that within a quarter. Within 3 months, you went from the sellers taking no price reductions whatsoever to 10% of the sellers taking a 16% price reduction. That's pretty dramatic, and that's why I introduced it. It's a great leading indicator of what the market's doing. Here you can see it on a percentage. You can see the market was behaving sort of typical. Then you can see this going into the first quarter of 2022, and then boom, again, like I said, before second quarter, before April 1st, maybe this is March 1st, you can see the rapid slowdown. You can see we were slow the second half of 2022, first quarter of 2023, even though we were improving, you were still less, still large number of reductions. And right now we're basically floating right around 100% with some bounce. Here's that frequency of reduction. So what percentage of the sellers are doing price reduction? The least you'd expect is 11.6%. Right now we're at 11.8. So we're basically having very few sellers take price reductions. You'd actually expect that number to be 17%. So we're 5.2% short, meaning 5.2% fewer sellers are taking price reductions. And in a cool marketplace, you'd expect it to be over 25% of the sellers taking price reductions. Here you can see that you're only at 74% of the sellers doing price reductions, a huge change from 2022 and early 2023. Here's the overbidding. So this is what buyers are doing. And you can see right now that buyers normally would be at 5.1% overbid, and they're right now at 5.9%. Not a huge difference, but it tells you that the market's hot when buyers are overbidding more than they typically overbid. And that's all adjusted for this time of the year. Now we're looking at the frequency of overbidding. The frequency of overbidding is essentially right where you'd expect it to be. You'd expect it to be at 64.6, you're at 66.6. So 2% more buyers are overbidding than you expect, but the high you'd expect is 3/4. The least you'd expect is 50%. Basically, the range right for this time of the year is between 50 and 3/4 of the buyers are overbidding. Right now, we're sort of in the middle of that with 2/3 of the buyers overbidding to get their house. This is looking at the price over a long period of time. This is on log. The reason I like log is we can draw a line and sort of look at the rate of appreciation. You can see we're very close to where you'd expect the appreciation to be. You can also see in 2021 and early 2022, we were way above the level. You can also see right at the end of the year, just, the end of this year, beginning of 2023, we were way below. This was the furthest below the line we ever were after we were the furthest above. So we went from the furthest above to the furthest below, the biggest shift ever, to basically right now being back pretty close to where you'd expect it to be. Now we're leaving Silicon Valley as a whole, and we're sort of going back to large micro market areas, but these are done by county, and this is more so you can see what's going on at a county level. And if you look at both Alameda County and Santa Clara County, they typically have inventory somewhere up around 1,400. They're both down around 700 now, so half the inventory you'd expect. San Mateo County is basically unchanged. I mean, if I would have almost picked 400 for their typical inventory, and they're at 423. So San Mateo County is acting completely different than Santa Clara and Alameda counties. This is the number of offers accepted. Again, all three counties are down. You can sort of judge a percentage amount, but you can see Alameda County and Santa Clara County are sort of mirroring each other. Days on unsold inventory. It's pretty interesting that San Mateo County historically is below the 3, sort of on the low side. We got the shelter in place, which you can see very predominantly here. And you come out of that, and San Mateo County went to basically on the top the whole time. And right now it's at 41 days, where Santa Clara County is at 29 and Alameda County is at 32. As a result of the pandemic and whatever shifts that's causing, you went the county that was typically the fastest, San Mateo, went from typically the fastest to now the slowest county. Here's days on marketplace, the 75th percentile. You can see the same thing, 15 for Santa Clara, 18 for Alameda, 24 San Mateo being the slowest. And if you come back, they were pretty much together, and now there's a separation. And again, where did it happen? It happened right here with the pandemic. Here's the magnitude of price reductions, very close together. I wouldn't say one was on top of the other, but now San Mateo County is significantly larger price reductions than either Alameda County or Santa Clara County. This is the frequency of price reductions. San Mateo County, the highest amount of price reductions at 16% of the sellers. Alameda and Santa Clara basically at 11. Overbidding. San Mateo County, the lowest at 2.8, call it 3%. Santa Clara next at 5%. Alameda at 7.8, almost 8%. So Alameda County, longer commutes, more affordable, is where the overbidding is the highest right now. And that's sort of interesting because that's where budgets are tighter and buyers are more hesitant, from what I've seen, to overbid. So that means they have a fairly significantly hotter marketplace. Frequency of overbidding, only 50% in San Mateo County, 2/3 in Santa Clara County, and approaching 3/4 in Alameda County. This is the appreciation since 2015, that last 9 months. San Mateo County has the lowest, followed by Alameda County, and Santa Clara County has the most at 91% appreciation in just 8 years. Here's the pricing on log paper. And what to me is the real takeaway is that didn't get updated. This horizontal line should be lower down right about here. Look how close Santa Clara and San Mateo County are. They're within what, $18,000 of one another. And Santa Clara County is way above the plateau of 2021. San Mateo County is below because the line there is too high. Alameda County is right in it. So you can see the 3 counties are acting fairly significantly differently. This is it on regular paper where the horizontal lines are adjusted, so you can see how close together Santa Clara and San Mateo County are. And you can see that San Mateo is below, and you can see Santa Clara County is above. That just shows you why it's important to look at the data so many different ways. This is the estimated payments for the different areas. And with that, here's the raw numbers. You can look at whatever you want. Number of new listings was fairly flat from last week. With that, we leave the Silicon Valley and we go into what I call the Greater Bay Area. We're adding in San Francisco Marin, the North Bay, Central Valley, and Central Coast. There are the numbers for you to come back and look at. And now we'll get into the data. We've talked about Silicon Valley's lack of inventory, 1,700 versus 3,000. But look at North Bay and Central Valley. 4,800 might have been a sort of a typical number for this time of the year. They're down here at 2,300 and 1,800, somewhere approaching 40% and 50% of the inventory. Huge difference, much more severe in those outlying, more affordable areas than within Central Valley. And, I can't do the math on the fly, but you can see the Central Coast and still the cities, San Francisco and Marin, not being impacted as much. This is the number of offers that were accepted. Everybody's down across the board, pretty much the lowest record low numbers in all the different areas. Days of unsold inventory. So Silicon Valley is the hottest, followed by the Central Valley, followed by North Bay, followed by the Central Coast, and coming in last place is San Francisco and Marin. And that becomes interesting because when you go back and look at the numbers, San Francisco and Marin, Silicon Valley is more expensive than those 2 counties now, which I don't think's happened before. Here's the days on marketplace. Silicon Valley coming in first, followed by Central Valley. You're starting to see the theme here, followed by North Bay, followed by Central Coast, followed by San Francisco and Marin. This is the price reductions. Who's got the most price reductions? A little bit of a mix up here. We actually have Central Coast having the most price reductions, followed by the North Bay, then followed by San Francisco and Marin. So even though San Francisco and Marin was doing bad on price reductions, they're holding firm. Then the Central Valley, and doing the least price reductions is Silicon Valley. Frequency of price reductions. Silicon Valley has the least number of sellers reducing their price. Then I believe we have the orange line, which is San Francisco and Marin. Then I believe we have North Bay at 22%. Then we have Central Valley with 24% of the sellers reducing their price. It's interesting that even though Central Valley was very fast, 25% of the sellers are doing their price reductions, and the area that's doing the most price reductions is the Central Coast areas. This is the overbidding. The area with the most overbidding is Silicon Valley, followed by San Francisco and Marin. And again, sort of a contradiction, even though San Francisco and Marin was doing poorly on the first slides with overbidding, it's doing well. Then you get into the North Bay and the Central Valley. So the magnitude of the Central Valley is fairly small, which almost contradicts the other slide where it was coming in second place. And in last place is the Central Coast. This is the frequency of overbidding. Very uncommon in the Central Coast at only 40%. Most common in Silicon Valley. The other three areas are very close together, right around 50 to 55%. And this is the total appreciation. You can really see San Francisco and Marin has done the least appreciation at only 29%. The Central Valley has done the most appreciation at 86%. Silicon Valley is second at 80%. North Bay looks like it's coming in at 68%. So my gray and my blue line are close together, and the blue line is the Central Coast, and it's the most volatile. You can see back here, it's done big fluctuations. And that's because you're looking at Santa Cruz and Monterey, and you have areas along the 101 corridor that are fairly inexpensive and areas along the coast that are very expensive. And it's more subjective to market mix shifts. Okay, now we're looking at the estimated payments for each of the 5 regions. You can see Silicon Valley is more expensive than San Francisco and Marin, and that's because the prices are more expensive. You can see Central Coast comes in third, North Bay, and finally Central Valley being the most affordable. This is these payments are estimates based on the jumbo 30-year fixed 80% loan and guesstimates for insurance and calculated property taxes. And with that, we finished up week number 35. To get to the archive on YouTube, you go to the green root URL. To get to the live presentation Saturday morning, you add in the year 2023. To get the handout, which is available 15 minutes before the hour most weeks, you add in H for handout 2023-0902. And to get to any episode, you put in the year, month, date code. I'm available for any questions. I'm Richard Calhoun, Creekside Realty, 40 years working with buyers and sellers in the area. I'm not seeing anyone unmute themselves. I will wrap it up and have a great week, everybody. Bye for now.